Hello and welcome to the Shakespeare podcast. In this episode we'll be looking at the daughters of King Lear, the good, the bad and the ugly. It seems at first glance to be a simple case of one good girl and two bad girls, or so many 19th and 20th century critics thought. Cordelia was portrayed as perfect, the image of what femininity should be. And then there's Goneril and Regan, bad to the bone from start to finish. The idea of the two extremes of womanhood, either perfect virtue or evil, is of course a Victorian idea, and Shakespeare wasn't Victorian. The reasons why this interpretation is misleading is that the play was written in the early 17th century, and also that that's not what's written in the text. A closer reading of the play allows us to see a more nuanced picture. In Act 1, Scene 1, King Lear abdicates the throne, and he intends to leave his kingdom to his three daughters, Goneril, Regan and Cordelia. And he asks them to say how much they love him. Goneril and Regan are married to the Dukes of Cornwall and Albany, respectively. Cordelia is still single, but is about to be married off to either the Duke of Burgundy or the King of France. What actually happens is that Goneril and Regan understand the job that they've been asked to do. This is in public, the court is there, and in public they declare their love for the king, and they get their reward because of it. There's no sense that Goneril and Regan's personal feelings have anything to do with this. This declaration of love is strictly for the public and the newspapers. When it comes to Cordelia's turn, she refuses to play ball, and effectively humiliates her father in front of everybody. It's clear from Lear's response that he's not used to people telling him to get lost. He gets angry. Now, it's ridiculous to assume that Cordelia doesn't know what she's doing, or indeed how Lear will react. Or as some critics argue, like A.C. Bradley, that she's just too virtuous to tell a lie. That's Cordelia's problem. She's too good. Perhaps we might look a little closer to what Shakespeare is telling us. Cordelia is about to be married off by her father. She has no control over this, over who she's going to be married to. But she does have a say over declaring her love for her father, the king, and it will make a difference over whom she marries. Maybe Cordelia thinks no man will marry her if she's been disinherited, or at the very least she'll end up being married to a man who's not looking for a meal ticket. Of course, Cordelia is right. She refuses to say that she loves the king in any kind of ridiculous overblown language, and he gets angry and disinherits her. At which point the Duke of Burgundy says, well, if she's no lands and no power, then I can't marry her. It's not personal, it's marriage, it's just business. And therefore the Duke of Burgundy is out. In this way, Cordelia does indeed get to choose her own husband. A couple of other things need to be noted here. King Lear seems to think that if his daughters say they love him in public, that will be enough to get him treated properly after he has vacated the throne. None of his daughters think that. Goneril and Regan are happy enough to go through the charade of saying that they love the king to get the power they want, and Cordelia wants to use the occasion to take control of her own destiny. Incidentally, the King of France tells us why he's marrying Cordelia, despite the fact that she's been disinherited by King Lear, her father. The King of France says that Cordelia is herself a dowry, which is true. Cordelia may be disinherited, but she's still a princess. And later in the play, the King of France will invade the country, not to get his wife's land back, but to save his father-in-law, the king. Does the King of France know there's going to be trouble? Well, he may not, but Cordelia certainly does. Asked to say goodbye to her sisters, Cordelia says to them, quote, I know you, what you are. They brush her off, of course, but as soon as she's gone, they make a pact to work together in the future. All that we, the audience, know at this stage is that King Lear has made a mistake which is underlined by him banishing Kent, his most faithful servant. We suspect that Cordelia is right about her sisters, and we kind of like Cordelia for opposing her father's authority and doing her own thing. In modern parlance, Cordelia is a bit punk, a bit goth. She's a bit unorthodox, and that always seems attractive. Shakespeare loses no time at all in showing us how Lear's mistake will play out. Act 1, Scene 3, Oswald tells Goneril Lear's knights are behaving badly, and Goneril tells Oswald to instruct the servants to treat them, quote, coldly. Notice that while Goneril is making plans, Lear's followers are indeed behaving badly. At the end of Act 1, Scene 4, when Goneril makes her appearance, she complains to her father that his retinue is causing trouble, and she'd like him to do something about it. Lear is incredulous and says, "This is not Lear, and who is it that can tell me who I am?" Goneril, his daughter, doubles down and says, "That's very funny, but you need to sort this out." Lear flies into a rage and calls for his horses so that he can leave. Enter the Duke of Albany to ask what's happening. Lear denies that his followers have done anything. Goneril assures her husband that her father is going mad. Lear denies it and sounds a bit more mad. Albany suggests that maybe Goneril has gone too far, and Goneril says that she hasn't gone far enough. As the audience, it's difficult to know who's in the right and who's in the wrong. Goneril tells Oswald to take her steward to take a letter to her sister Regan to tell her what's been going on, and to embellish it to make it sound worse. Albany says, "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" And Goneril says that Albany's too good and too nice to understand these things, and that she'll take care of it. Act 2, Scene 2 starts with the fight between Kent, now disguised, and Oswald, who was sent to Regan's house by Goneril with a letter, if you recall. Regan enters with her husband, the Duke of Cornwall. The men argue over who's to blame for the quarrel. But as Kent is being put in the stocks, Ryan encourages his punishment, something that she'll do more of later in the play. In Act 2, Scene 4, Lear arrives to find his messenger is in the stocks and wants to know what's going on. Regan says she agrees with her sister Goneril that Lear's followers behave badly, and here's another example of it. Lear should go back to Goneril, says Regan, and ask forgiveness. Lear's too old and doddery, and his daughters should guide him. Lear gets angry, but just proves Regan's point that he's unstable, with more outbursts. Then Goneril enters, and Lear starts to lose it altogether. Goneril quite rightly points out that she only criticised his followers and not him. Lear says, "It doesn't matter. I'll stay with your sister Regan." And Regan says, "Well, hang on a minute. I didn't sign up for this. I'm not ready to receive you." There's an argument between Lear and Goneril and Regan, and Lear storms out as the storm is brewing. Both Goneril and Regan say that they gladly look after their father, but not his followers and knights. And Gloucester says the storm's brewing. Quote, "For many miles about, there's scarce a bush." Regan says that King Lear has brought this on himself, which, as the audience, we know is true. She also says that this is what men are like, and we should just shut the doors and forget about it. The scene ends with the Duke of Cornwall calling for the doors to be shut against the storm. Now, we need to take a short break here in order to discuss the question of a short break. You see, Lear is a long play, and none of the early editions of Shakespeare's works give us any indication of where the interval should be. It's not credible that Shakespeare's audience, or indeed a modern audience, should sit through the whole play without a break. So where should the break come, and on what grounds do we have for arguing for where the break should come? In an earlier podcast, I split the story of King Lear into two parts, creating a break after Act 3, because there's so much dramatic weight in Act 4 and 5 that such a break might create a dramatic balance. Many productions follow this same rationale. However, the other option is to have the break here, after Act 2. King Lear has fallen out with Goneril and Regan. Edgar has fled and disguised himself as the mad beggar Poor Tom, and Lear is cast out into the storm, a storm that is physical, psychological and spiritual. The end of Act 2, with Regan and Cornwall calling for the doors to be shut, and the sounds on stage of doors being locked and windows being closed, that Lear is on the outside and the storm blowing a gale, feels like it might be the end of the beginning. Added to this, almost the whole of Act 3 is given over to Lear the Fool, Poor Tom and Kent, which Regan refers to as Lear's, quote, desperate train, and the argument that the most natural break of the play is at the end of Act 2 gains more weight. As I said, almost the whole of Act 3 passes without any appearance of Lear's daughters, although they are condemned at the mock trial and Lear makes constant mention of them. Notice how often Goneril and Regan are referred to in animalistic terms as dogs or she-wolves, etc. It's not until Act 3 Scene 7 where we get the scene in which Gloucester is tortured and his eyes gouged out. Although Goneril and Edmund have left before Gloucester is brought in as a prisoner, it is Goneril who suggests that they, quote, pluck out his eyes. Regan is involved in the torture and encourages her husband to gouge Gloucester's eyes out. And when her husband is attacked by a servant, it's Regan who takes the sword and runs the servant through from behind. She stabs him in the back. The fact that the scene is played out on stage rather than being reported to the audience is meant to affect us in a visceral manner. We know Goneril and Regan are bad cats, and everything that happens to them now needs to be seen in that light. In Scene 2 we learn that Goneril is in love with Edmund. She waves him off to war whilst telling us that her husband is a wimp who's more of a woman than a man. Goneril wonders how her boyfriend can be so different from her husband, quote, oh the difference of man and man. When her husband arrives, she won't listen to what he has to say, most of which applies to Goneril more than he knows, and she accuses him of being a coward. They argue. When the messenger arrives to tell them that the Duke of Cornwall is dead, Goneril immediately thinks that her sister will be trying to steal her boyfriend. She's not really interested in what we would call the bigger picture. She's just interested in herself. Act 4 Scene 3 we learn that Cordelia is back in town, and she is moved to tears by the story she hears about her father's treatment. And in Scene 4 we see Cordelia again, for the first time since Act 1, Scene 1, right at the beginning of the play. She's looking for a father. In Act 4 Scene 7, Cordelia is reunited with Lear, and these scenes are meant to contrast with the behaviour of Goneril and Regan that we've seen in the rest of the play. The presence of the Doctor shows that Cordelia wants her father cared for. She wants him cured of the madness that is caused by her sister's behaviour. But notice how Act 4 Scene 7 plays out. At the opening of the scene, Cordelia says, quote, how shall I live and work to match thy goodness? My life will be too short, and every measure fail me. She's not talking about her father here, she's talking about the Duke of Kent. For Lear, Cordelia calls him poor father, my royal lord, and your majesty, which are all the things that she was happy to call him in Act 1. Cordelia treats her father far better than Goneril and Regan, although that wouldn't be too hard. But she still won't stoop to her sister's insincere speeches that we heard in Act 1. What she referred to way back at the beginning of the play as oily and glib. When Lear asks if she is Cordelia, she says, "I am." And when Lear says she has cause to hate him for what he did to her, the fact that he disinherited her, she says, "No cause, no cause." Cordelia asks if he can walk, and Lear says to her, "Forget and forgive, I am old and foolish." And they exit before Cordelia can say that she does forgive him or that she does forget. The scene is filled with pathos. It is meant to be emotional, and we are moved by Lear's contrition and Cordelia's kindness. But it hardly makes her the paradigm of virtue. And she has still invaded the kingdom of Albion with an army. On the other hand, she wouldn't have been able to see her father again if she hadn't have arrived with an army. Cordelia reappears at the end of Act 4 as a different person than we saw in Act 1. She's more mature, she's a married woman, and she's referred to by some of the other characters as, quote, the Queen. Gone is the petulance of the line, "I know you what you are," and it's replaced with a more regal judgment befitting a queen. She compliments Kent, she's kind to her father. She has no need to raise her voice or try and impose her will. She's the queen after all. The point here is the contrast. While Goneril and Regan have got worse, striving for power and being willful, Cordelia has got better, more virtuous, more calm, more regal. The bad girls treated her nasty, but she's come back as a better person. This contrast is highlighted by Shakespeare, who opens Act 5 with Regan asking Edmund if he's sleeping with her sister. Edmund lies and denies it. We know that he's lying. Enter Goneril and Albany, and there's a discussion about the upcoming battle. But we, the audience, know that Edmund is sleeping with Goneril while he's chatting to her husband. Regan wants Edmund. Goneril knows it and is plotting to kill her husband. And in the midst of all this, the Duke of Albany is still oblivious to what's really going on. As they leave, Edgar, disguised as the mad beggar Poor Tom, gives Albany the letter which is going to reveal all to him. As the battle is about to begin, it's plain to the audience who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and we know who should win. Well, we're about to be disappointed. Act 5, Scene 3, the battle is over, and the baddies have won, and the audience is confused. Cordelia is stoic and regal in defeat. She basically says it's not the first time that bad things have happened to good people. And she wants to know where her sisters are, because she'd like to see them. Lear, on the other hand, doesn't want to see them at all, and instead he has a fantasy where he'll live in a prison cell with Cordelia, and he'll ask her forgiveness, and they'll hear about what's going on at the court, and they'll have a great time together. Reality intrudes, and Edmund has them carted off to prison. It's the last time we hear from Cordelia before she returns to the stage in Lear's arms as a corpse. Ironically, much has been said about Cordelius's silence. What we can say is that Cordelia doesn't explicitly forgive her father, King Lear, though he asks for it. And she's arrested on the field of battle, even though I've yet to see a production where Cordelia is led away wearing battle armour. She's definitely a prisoner of war, but most productions portray her as having come from the battle in a nice dress with a perfect hairdo, which doesn't really make any sense. Also, Cordelia doesn't speak to Edmund in this scene, if you notice, because she has no idea who he is. We know who Edmund is, but Cordelia has never met him before, and thus she doesn't actually speak to him. Finally, we should note that some Shakespeare scholars see in Cordelia's failure to speak in this scene a mirror or an echo of her refusal to speak in Act 1. That's Cordelia for you. She doesn't have a lot to say. Moving on. Albany calls for Lear and Cordelia to be put under his custody. Edmund declines to provide them. Albany pulls rank on Edmund, and Goneril and Regan both jump to Edmund's defence. Regan says Edmund led my late husband's forces, and anyway he's going to marry me, and then he'll be a duke just like you, because he's only been an earl, sort of, up until now. Goneril says, hang on a minute, he doesn't need to be married to you. He can lift himself up by his own actions. Albany says, that'd be true if he marries you, and Regan would like to argue some more, but she's not feeling very well. And, says Albany, that's not really in his keeping. He doesn't get to decide that. Regan says, hurry up and marry me. And Albany says, well, Edmund can't marry you because I'm arresting him for treason, and also for sleeping with my wife. Regan is so sick she's led away, and in an aside we realise that Goneril has poisoned her sister. There's a fight scene. Edmund falls and Goneril runs to his side, saying, you didn't need to fight him. And the Duke of Albany says to his wife, shut your mouth, dame, which is not the kind of thing you expect from a duke to his duchess. Albany knows of his wife's infidelity, and Goneril says, so what? It's not against the law. Albany shows her the letter that Edgar has given him in order to upbraid her about her infidelity, and says, do you know about this? When Goneril completely ignores him and says, go screw yourself, and she storms off. Edmund's still dying, but he's still going to have plenty of time to listen to discover that he's been killed by his brother Edgar. He's got time to listen to the story of what happens in Act 3 and Act 4 before the messenger runs on with a bloody knife, which has killed Goneril. It's traditionally assumed that Goneril kills herself because of Edmund's defeat, as there are very few people left to kill her. Regan has been poisoned by her sister, Goneril, who has confessed it before she dies. The bodies of both sisters are brought on stage as Albany commands it, whilst Edmund is taken off stage. Enter Lear with the dead Cordelia in his arms. It is the climax of the tragedy. Cordelia was the good sister, the good daughter, and Lear mourns her loss in the most pathetic way. It is a scene of great emotion. Finally, Lear dies, and Edgar, as the new king, has the last lines of the play. At this point, Lear and his 3 daughters are carried off stage in a death march, which of course reminds us of the title of that old popular play, The True Chronicle History of the Life and Death of King Lear and his 3 daughters. The end. Thank you for listening to this episode about King Lear's daughters, and we'll see you next time on the Shakespeare podcast.